Guys, I want to welcome our audience to season 2, episode 10,
Yes.
which will be a sinfully great episode. I'm Paul DeGarabedian, senior media analyst for ComScore, Thaddeus Bouchard from Screen Dollars, Mike Polydor's Paper Airplanes. You can see, if you're watching this on video, his hat says Paper Airplane.
More importantly than any of that, this is the NHL first round playoff edition of Ticket to Ride.
Hey.
And all I can say is go Kings go. Sorry, Matt Pollock.
That's an inside, insider stuff. And Mike, I know that you're very much into hockey. I know your son plays hockey. You're very much in that hockey world. I'm going to put you on the spot. Favorite hockey movie?
Oh, well, it's got to be Slapshot, of course.
Right.
I knew you would say that. Thank you. Not the Mighty Ducks,
Not
Slapshot.
the Mighty Ducks, although Goon is a really good one.
Yeah,
if you
that
ever
is
want to
good.
watch one.
Sean William Scott.
Yeah, anyway.
I was going to say Rollerball, although it's not exactly a hockey movie, maybe.
It's more of a roller derby kind of.
That is roller derby on steroids. So let's talk about, I alluded to it in the title, Sinfully Great Weekend. I'm losing my voice suddenly. It was let's edit that. It was a sinfully great weekend. Let's talk about it, guys.
Well, and so Sinners just kept climbing. You know, there is a narrative out there about Sinners that I think, Paul, we talked about in the pregame that is false. And that is, and again, this part bugs me. And they start worrying about how much the budget was, what the movie is, and they take a look at the box office and they say it's a disaster. It's a disaster based on what? And in the case of Sinners, all it did from the time it hit tracking to the time the final gross was announced on Monday was grow.
Let's climb.
The Rotten Tomato score was huge. The cinema score was huge. Audiences loved the movie. Critics loved the movie worked. And, it ended up $48 million for the weekend. It is the highest original IP post-pandemic. Think about that for a second. And that kind of goes back to a lot of what I think it points to a lot of what we've been talking about over the last couple of years, and that was highlighted at CinemaCon, and that is, Hollywood has a bit of a marketing challenge right now, and that is, for 75 years, we marketed movies the same way, and, for the last 50 of them, TV was a big component in what we do. And as we mentioned on the last podcast, you can't do that anymore. The idea of I'm going to blast, with a TV campaign and I'm going to become water cooler talk, the next morning, that doesn't play out anymore.
Mike, I agree with you, but I would say that it's not original IP. I would say that having Ryan Coogler and Michael B. Jordan in a horror movie right there, they package that up in a brilliant way and that becomes the IP. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm just saying, like, in a way, what differentiates this movie from Black Bag and Novocaine and Last Breath, all three great movies, is that this had that whole filmmaker vibe going for it, big star power, the horror movie genre, a great trailer, and a great release date. So that all worked. But I agree with you, Mike. What do you do in weekend 2, 3 for marketing, that kind of thing?
Well, it becomes a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy on some of this marketing because you keep kind of going back to the same thing over and over again. And, these are the tactics that, are comfortable to a lot of people on what you do. And some of the uncomfortable tactics of more of a digital marketing campaign and more of a targeting. And I think you're right, Paul, in the fact that you had a couple of very key pieces that created, this gave Sinners kind of a credibility that it something like Black Bag or Novocaine had a higher barrier to achieve, I guess is what I think.
Your point, Paul, is that this is filmmaker driven. It's not IP driven. It's filmmaker and it's star driven. And if you think back, classic Hollywood, right? A Hitchcock film was a Hitchcock film. You wanted to go see the Hitchcock film, and obviously he had the top A-list Hollywood stars in his films too. So it's almost a throwback in that sense.
And Jordan Peele as well. He had 3 original horror movies, one after the next, but they were original in their concept and their storytelling. but there was a brand behind that. But what do you think that Thaddeus and Mike, because you brought this up, Mike, that there are people within, let's say, the marketing departments that are afraid to think outside the box because if a new innovative strategy fails, then you get blamed. So, like, again, success has 1,000 fathers.
So
And
there's, are you saying Hollywood has a formula? Is that what you're saying?
I think, well, they want to stick to it because they don't want to be the one to mess up the
I'm
formula.
not going to blame, I wouldn't blame, here, guys, I would never blame just Hollywood. I think it's human nature is what it comes down to. And I think the human nature is this has worked all these years, and I recognize we have an issue, and I know I've got to do something, but to what extent am I going to take a chance on whatever that movie is to move a little of it down the road?
Mike, even release dates, right? So certain movies used to always go at the holidays, and then other movies were 4th of July, Memorial Weekend. I know with one of the huge movies at Lionsgate, even the release dating of it, had that not worked, I believe it was Hunger Games,
Well,
it would have.
I was about to bring that up. So I was part of the team when we came up with the Hunger Game release date. And, David Spitz was really leading the charge on that one. And we did a ton of analysis on it. And what you couldn't find is you couldn't find the comp that supported you could go out in this period and do it. The closest thing you had was Alice in Wonderland. So you said, okay, there is precedent that people will come out, but that was the only one. You could argue it was an outlier. And the idea being, just because you haven't done it before doesn't mean it won't work. Is not, that shouldn't stop you from trying it.
But remember too, Mike, if that had failed, let's say, and it certainly didn't, and the franchise expanded and grew from there, I mean, that's a ballsy move. I mean, to do that.
It was, look, we took a lot of heat internally on that. And when the movie went out and opened up to $150 million, all of a sudden now, if you look at it, 12 years later, the Spring Corridor has become a linchpin when you look at movies that open up. We just had Minecraft go out.
And what date was that? Early? I can't remember. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I'm sure.
I believe it was March is what we ended up.
But I mean, was it early March or mid? I can look it up.
It was mid-March,
Yeah.
and I believe, our big strategy behind that was looking at the calendar. We had spring break, and spring break isn't just one weekend. Spring break, kind of rolls out. And if you can take advantage of, kids being out of school, colleges being out, it's kind of like summer light
Sure.
in a way.
It's like
where you-
week 1, week 2, week 3, and they all matter, right? Because
they
of the
all
vacation
matter,
schedule. Right?
and the strategy absolutely
That
worked.
took guts because that's March 23, 2012. Looking at the ComScore data here in the engine room, 52, like you said, $0.5 million domestic opening. It did a 2.67 multiple, winding up at $408 million domestically.
And what was Mike, what was the risk that the studio took? Was it like a very more than one might expect marketing spend on that movie, or what was the risk exactly?
I mean, the risk on the movie, well, yes. I mean, it was one of our largest marketing spends to date. I will say that Tim Palin, who ran the marketing campaign, brilliantly came up with a strategy of we're not going to show the games in the trailer. If you want to see the games, you have to come buy a ticket, which was fantastic. So everything led up to, to that kind of created this great want to see. The risk for the studio, remember Lionsgate, we had a kind of a history of hitting them where they're not. And this was one of those as well. And Paul, this goes back to your original question, and it was a gutsy move, but it was a calculated gutsy move, and that we had the data to back it up, and that we felt like this would be an area where we could win, where we wouldn't necessarily get lost with some of the other bigger trees if you went with Summer. Because remember, at this point, Hunger Games was a phenomenal book, but it wasn't, it hadn't established itself as a film series yet. So we needed to get in there in a period where it was going to be a little less congested, where we could get the inventory, so to speak, and we would be able to, pop a big gross.
And
Nobody went in there thinking we would do $150 million.
That release dating is very interesting. If you look at Sinners, and we'll get back more to Sinners, but if you look at late March, like March 31st, the original Matrix opened, but that was more of an April movie because it opened on the last day. Fast and Furious. I mean, Universal was one of the first studios to put could have been a summer movie in early or mid-April. And that's really interesting. Like you said, Mike, there's, just because it hasn't been done before doesn't mean it won't work.
Right.
Well, and we did the same thing on the original Saw. If you go back and look at that release date, that was one, and John Feldheimer, our CEO, gets all the credit on that. The line of thinking prior to that was, if you open a movie, a horror movie especially, over a Halloween weekend, you lose Saturday because there are all the Halloween parties and people aren't going to go.
Yep.
And Felt, had a great thing, and he goes, how did he put it? It's my experience. If everybody else isn't doing it, that's an opportunity for you.
Right.
And he wasn't wrong.
But it's still a risk. I mean, if it fails, then your ass is on the line, right?
It is definitely risky, but again, they're all calculated risks, because when you get the idea, you then go look at it, and then you do see, okay, I see how it could work. You wouldn't want to do something where you look at it and every data point tells you this is going to be a complete disaster.
Right.
If you looked at that, I would be a lot more concerned.
Right.
We always would joke, even this though is kind of changed, and there's 2 dates on the release date calendar that are the perceived as the worst dates of the year.
Super Bowl.
Labor Day.
Super Bowl.
Labor
Super
Day.
Bowl.
Well, no, Super Bowl actually has a history, Thaddeus, of working when you have the right counter programming.
Taken, even
Bucks over that weekend.
Hannah Montana.
Taken did it. Hannah Montana. So there is an opportunity to win over Super Bowl weekend, but Paul's right. So Labor Day weekend and the weekend after that traditionally were viewed as not great. And then there is the weekend after Thanksgiving. The first weekend in December is usually absolutely a dog weekend. But that has even changed over the last, probably 4 or 5 years. You had Violent Night that came out.
Was it 3 years ago that Labor Day weekend was National Cinema Day, right? So that's an approach to try to drive people.
Right. But again, you put a movie on there, and I think it was Shang-Chi went out, and all of a sudden did $100 million. And guess what?
Brilliant.
Labor Day is a great weekend.
Switch back to Sinners because we're on a kind of a lightning round episode.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to Sinners, I look at Warner Brothers' history of really supporting filmmakers, from Stanley Kubrick to Clint Eastwood, Bradley Cooper, others. This rings true this year with Sinners, Ryan Coogler. I mean, and the thing is, they're building a relationship with Ryan Coogler. This is chess, it ain't checkers. And I think they're looking at this from a long-term perspective. And, that movie is R-rated horror movie, 137 minutes long. It absolutely killed. And then coming up, Warner's is on a roll right now. Final Destination's coming up, Formula One, and F1 is one of the rare originals for the summer this year.
Well, and that's a great point, Paul, because prior to CinemaCon, Warner's, boy, were they taking it in.
Mickey.
And again, the trade publications can be rough, and they were just raking Warner's over the coals. All of a sudden, Minecraft, which everyone, prior to its release kind of had a raised eyebrow whether or not the movie was really going to work and was this going to be another big disaster. But the movie is, I think, Paul, you pointed it out, it's this year's Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah.
And it will become, I think it's this weekend, if not this weekend, later in the week, it will become one of Warner's top 5 earners of all time.
Well, it shows you, we always talk about the roller coaster, right? I mean, you had Mickey 17 and the Alto Knights. Everybody's, picking on Warner Brothers because those movies didn't, knock it out of the park. And then Minecraft comes along. And again, the other movies I just mentioned, Superman, F1, Final Destination, The Conjuring later this year. So, wow, what a lineup they have. It just shows, again, we had a whole episode called The Roller Coaster Ride, which isn't just about the box office. It's about also individual studios ride that roller coaster.
Well, we've talked about this before. There's an extreme pressure on these media companies that I don't think is quite understood by everybody. And that is, when you're a public company and you're dealing with Wall Street and the analysts, they want to see, this. They don't necessarily want to see your earnings do all of this.
Right.
Unfortunately, when you're in the movie business, this is what's going to happen. You're going to have quarters where, all the revenues come in, like Warner's quarter, when you add in Minecraft and you add in Sinners,
Yeah.
they're going to have a nice looking quarter.
Right.
Yeah, they are.
From a revenue standpoint. But when you can, fast forward a year from now and compare it quarter to quarter, depending on how their schedule plays out, their theatrical unit may have a tough time, comparing those numbers. It was one of those things, we used to run into it all the time at Lionsgate, and that is, the analysts were just focused on your revenue growth or your revenue line.
Right.
They always, while they said they understood it, they didn't quite understand the way that when you're a pure content company, the way the revenue flows.
But the studios all sit, or the major studios all sit inside this, underneath this umbrella of a media company, and the media company itself sits under a telecom company or something like that, right?
Yeah.
So different parts of those companies
point.
plan their business in very
Well, they
different
do,
ways,
but
right?
they also get very frustrated with the movie companies.
I think
Hence
so too.
why AT&T said we're out of the movie business, because they could not, they were looking at it like Wall Street, and they could not get their hands or their head around the bumps and valleys that come with being in the movie business.
So you're on top and then you're on the bottom, right? In 2024, Disney was the top grossing studio for all their theatrical releases. And the year before that and 2 years before that, they'd lost their mojo. They were never going to be the same studio again, So
It's what
who
people
knows?
outside of our industry don't get. And I don't mean to be condescending in that way at all. There's industries I have no clue about that I wouldn't speak to, but in our business, and we've seen this play out both, from the 30,000 foot level and at the micro level, that it's just the ups and downs. Again, not building widgets, not just cranking out the same thing every week. This is a different animal every week.
And you don't have anything really to project. Every movie is different. Even when you're talking about a movie that's part of a franchise or part of a, well, I can comp it to this. You have no idea if it's going to
And
take off.
Mike, there's movies that have stars that were huge in, let's say, superhero movies. Then they come out with a totally different kind of movie, like, well, it stars this person. I won't name them. And that movie bombs because
Well, I'm gonna give you a great example from the one I use from last year all the time, and that is Inside Out 2. I want to know who on their 2024 box office bingo card going into it had that movie at $654 million. No one. You know
what
what I
about
mean?
Minecraft, Mike? Did anyone have Minecraft doing what
No,
it did?
at doing $400 million when it's all said and done. Yeah, no one had that.
And
So,
globally, $1 billion, perhaps?
and that's the movie business. So while on some, in some respects, you look at it and go like, well, it's a great windfall. In as far as Warner's has to do, they're going to take all of those movies, put them in one giant pot and look at them. So Alto Knights and Minecraft and Sinners and Mickey 17 and all the other ones that Paul mentioned are all going to be, at the end of the day, how did we net out? What did it all
Yep.
look like at the end of
Yep.
the
It's
day?
a portfolio approach, as you always say, Mike.
Well, that's the example of the portfolio
So I
approach.
think so. The perspective that we're talking about up until this point is primarily the studio perspective. You're on top.
Yes.
You're down in the dumps. You're on top, film by film or year by year. But what about from the exhibitor perspective? Because the exhibitor, if it's a major Cineplex type of exhibitor, right? You've got 15 screens, 20 screens at your Cineplex. So you're playing all the movies from all the studios, the major movies,
Yes.
anyways. But then you've got your up weeks and your down weeks. You're riding that roller coaster, but you're the tail of the roller coaster, if I can mix my metaphors here, right?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Well, I mean, I look for the exhibitor. The portfolio approach is a much tougher pill to swallow because a lot of them, especially the smaller guys, they're paying their bills week to week. It's not like, okay, I can wait for all my cash to show up when Minecraft gets here or when Superman shows up. They just don't have that benefit. That makes it a lot more tough. I remember, I think I told you guys, I was talking to one exhibitor recently who has a major regional circuit, and he's like, "What do I tell my bankers?" And that's that's the big question a lot of these guys need to
Well,
say.
Mike, you go to your banker when the box office is riding high.
Well, right now is a great time to go and talk to them.
Don't go in March of this year. It would have been like, oh, we're not betting on that. That's
again.
And we're 1 month away from when everyone was in the dumps. Right, so we're only 1 month away from that now.
And this goes right back to what I said that applied to the studios and the media companies, and it applies to everything. And that is the box office business, the business of the movies is a peaks and valley roller coaster that we keep talking about. And I hate to break it to everybody, it's not going to change.
But Mike, that's why people want to listen to Ticket to Ride, because it's never boring, right, listeners?
Well,
there's always great stuff to talk about. We're going to have to wrap fairly soon because we all have very tight schedules today. Sinners was such a great result. I think we're going to see with The Accountant 2 another great result. That movie's getting great buzz. John Bernthal, one of my favorite actors, is in that movie. And then we'll have a big lead up to Thunderbolts because, guys, 2 weeks away is the start of the summer movie season officially.
You bet. And it's trending. That movie looks strong. It looks strong. Yeah.
And last year we didn't have a Marvel movie to kick off the summer. And what happened to May? It sucked. I mean, although there were some cool movies actually in May of last year.
But box office wise, right?
First time in 17 years we didn't have a Marvel movie.
Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes actually did well.
Right.
That, it was funny. You had, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes that came in. Yeah, and then, things really started kind of when Bad Boys opened up.
That's right, and that was right before Inside Out 2 opened. And of course, Fall Guy kicked off the summer last year. That movie took the fall. That movie was the Fall Guy, and I don't like it.
I agree with you. I'm going to keep defending that movie because, as I said before, it was never meant to be the kickoff to summer kind of movie. Right. It was meant to be it was a spring movie. Universal saw an opportunity when there was no Marvel movie, and that first week of May was open. Everyone should be thankful that Universal did that because that actually helped limp May along. So that movie takes a lot of heat that it shouldn't be taking.
Well, we're not going to take any heat for this episode. I'll tell you that.
Well,
good episode. Oh, real quick, I just want to say on Sinners, midweeks are really strong. And I predict a very modest drop for its second weekend.
They're going to have a great look. They're going to hold in and they're going to play and play and play. And, Accountant is one of those movies, I think, that, the first Accountant became very much a cult classic. We did an episode on this a while back where we talked about those movies that find life after theatrical. And The Accountant was that. And it feels like Accountant 2 is going to capitalize on that. Don't be surprised if Accountant 2 outgrosses the entire run of Accountant opening week.
You know what other movie did that? Austin Powers, the first one.
We talked about Austin Powers and we talked about Die Hard. So
The Spy Who Shagged Me did more business in its opening weekend than the original Austin Powers International Man of Mystery made in its entire theatrical run. But it became a beloved watch on, I guess at that point, DVD and VHS, maybe just it was probably DVD.
Maybe it was the Z channel.
The Z channel. Oh, we should do a whole episode on that. There's documentaries.
Well, which makes the point that we all live in the theatrical part of the movie business lives in this ecosystem that does include streaming, right? Streaming is an important part of the studio business.
I mean, Thaddeus, you're going to take us down a rabbit hole that Paul.
We got to stop.
That is a very good topic that we should tackle.
We will. And so stay tuned for that, dear listeners and dear viewers. And remember, you can find our Ticket to Ride podcast wherever records and tapes are sold. Also on YouTube, we have a video component. We're going to be doing these every 2 weeks, and we're never going to stop. Right, guys?
You bet.
Keep going.
That's right. And I do want to, again, emphasize Game 2 tonight at Crypto.com Arena. Everyone pull for the Los Angeles Kings. Sorry, Matt Pollock.
Go Kings. And sorry, Matt Pollock. All right, guys. Thank you. Okay. That's a wrap for this episode of Ticket to Ride. We'll see you next time. And I'll see you guys at the movies.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.